Welcome to a new episode of First Laps from the Melbourne paddock after the Formula 1 Australian Grand Prix. The first race of the season, as expected basically by everyone in this paddock, won by George Russell. In the end, won quite comfortably by Mercedes, although we have to say that the opening stages were maybe a little bit closer than anticipated. Big part of that was linked to the start. Funny bit is that Red Bull and a lot of other teams ran out of battery before the start, and Red Bull team boss Laurent Mekies joked. He said, well, thankfully we were not the only one, and he also said, we just thought it would be more fun to do it this way. Ferrari got the start done in quite a good way as expected, because they have a relatively small turbo. That's an advantage they will keep probably throughout the entire season, as Toto Wolff admitted. And after that, the reason that Mercedes could not really break free is related to, the DNA of these regulations. And it's what they call the yo-yo effect in the paddock. That means that once you get the overtake done, to get it done, you need to deploy quite a lot of electrical energy. And as a result of that, you're vulnerable at the next straight. And that means that the chance of someone else using the counter-attack is pretty high. And that's what we've seen in the first half of the race throughout the field, but also up front with Charles Leclerc and George Russell. That's basically the reason why Toto Wolff also admitted that they couldn't really pull clear in the opening laps. It did happen later on, of course linked to the Ferrari strategy that we will talk about in a bit. But after that, we could see the real pace advantage that Mercedes has. And that became especially obvious after Ferrari finally made their pit stops, because then Ferrari drivers had the new tires, the fresh tires. But even then, at that specific part of the race, George was still 2 to 3 tenths per lap quicker than the Ferrari driver. So that tells you the real pace advantage that Mercedes holds. Immediately brings us to the Ferrari strategy. Because, everything is new in Formula 1, but you could argue that the Ferrari strategy today was not particularly new. Of course, team boss Fred Vasseur got asked after the race, and he said, we thought it would be too early to make a pit stop under one of the two early virtual safety cars. He thought it would be too long to go to make the one-stop work. He said, in hindsight, we were wrong because you could do 300 laps on these tires. That was his quote. Not sure if you could do 300 laps, but for sure you could do a lot more than Ferrari anticipated. But even having said that and keeping the Ferrari simulations and the Pirelli simulations in mind, I still think they should have gone for the split strategy. That's the whole point of having two cars up front. So then, exactly like Lewis said over the radio, the best bet would be to pit early with one car, leave the other car out, and then basically you're competitive with at least one of your drivers in whatever scenario might unfold. So I think Ferrari, and also they admitted after the race, got it wrong. Having said that, Mercedes is just head and shoulders above the rest. It's what Fred Vasseur also said. He said, yes, we can talk about strategy, but we still have work to do because Mercedes was stronger today. And Mercedes was especially stronger in terms of the efficiency and the consistent energy deployment lap after lap after lap. And that's where stuff gets really interesting, especially compared to the Mercedes customer teams. Because Ferrari was, of course, the main rival, as expected. Basically, was a lot of sandbagging going on in Bahrain. But the pecking order was predicted in the correct way. I also said that to Laurent Mekies. I said, well, you guys predicted the pecking order correctly by saying it's Mercedes, Ferrari, then a small gap, and then McLaren and Red Bull quite evenly matched. And he said, yes, but that we predicted correctly is not something to be proud of, because Red Bull would, of course, have preferred it in a different way. Still, Max came through the field, so it was not that bad. Max also said it's actually been quite a decent start with the own power unit. But coming back to Mercedes and coming back to the efficiency that they show, that's especially interesting compared to the other Mercedes powered teams. So especially looking at McLaren. If you go back to qualifying and if you look at the GPS data from the qualifying laps, more specific, if we compare George's pole lap to Oscar Piastri, of course, today, drama for the home hero. But if we compare his qualifying lap to the one from George, you can see significant differences in terms of the efficiency. I touched upon it yesterday a little bit, saying that Mercedes was quicker in all the corners. Usually you would pay the price on the straights, and that didn't happen, and that says an awful lot about how efficient the Mercedes factory team is. But if we go a little bit more into detail, you can see it towards turn 6. Because towards turn 6, Oscar was lifting off early. George was staying full throttle for longer. That would usually mean less harvesting for the battery. And that would usually mean paying the price on the next flat-out sections towards turn 9. But if we look at the delta times, we see a completely different picture. Because, of course, George Russell gained on his way to turn 6. But he also gained quite significantly on his way to turn 9. And I think that tells you everything that you have to know about the Mercedes factory team versus its customers. That in terms of the efficiency, they are clearly a step ahead. You can say, well, part of that is the chassis, part of that is the aero package. And that's probably right. But a big chunk of that is understanding the power unit. You can say, well, that's also normal for a factory team. That's also right. But there's more at play here. Because in Bahrain, more specifically the second week of Bahrain testing, the Mercedes factory team already used this spec of the power unit. The customer teams had a different specification. They had a more basic spec, also in terms of mappings. That kind of gave Mercedes, the factory team of Mercedes, more chances to gather data and also to learn about the ideal deployment. I know, a completely different circuit, but still the learnings are quite important, especially on the new set of regulations. And all the other teams, Alpine, Williams, and above all McLaren, they have a lot steeper learning curve throughout the season. Also, the customers talked about that a little bit. James Fowles, the Williams team principal, said, yeah, if I'm really honest, I expected some more information from Mercedes HPP. Also, Andrea Stella mentioned it. He said, yeah, we clearly have a step to make. We clearly have to work with HPP to catch up, because that's where we are really lacking compared to Mercedes. Toto Wolff also got asked about it, and he said, well, of course, with new regulations, it's always difficult to keep everyone happy. But, you know, as an engine supplier, we try to provide good services to everyone, and we think we have done that. And clearly, it was all within the boundaries of the contract. So you can argue that Mercedes just has been pretty smart, and that's the benefit of being your own PU manufacturer and therefore being a customer team. So that's a crucial advantage and absolutely a crucial factor behind today's victory that George Russell, in the end got quite comfortably. Then we have to talk about what, basically was the main topic of the whole weekend, the new regulations in Formula 1. A lot of drivers were really outspoken after qualifying, and I have to say it was a similar story in the media pen after the race. Again, Lando Norris was probably most outspoken of all. He came to us in the media pen and I said, well, Lando, yesterday you said we've gone from the best F1 cars to the worst. So how was it in a race trim and how was the actual racing? And Lando said it was even worse. So he finds it really artificial, but he also finds it relatively dangerous, because Lando Norris said, like this, it's waiting for a big incident to happen. And he went even one step further and he said, well, it's basically waiting for one car to go over the fence. And when he said that, I was like, that's a pretty strong quote. But Lando refers to the closing speeds of these new cars, especially when one of the cars is harvesting the energy. So that can be lift and coast, that can be super clipping. And if the other one is deploying the energy, that's where it gets really tricky, because then the closing speeds, the difference in speed is really high, and according to Lando, that can be quite dangerous. So that's one element to address. It will for sure be part of the evaluation after China. The second element is the type of racing we get in general. I think from a viewer's point of view, also I heard it from some colleagues in the media center, they actually thought the show was quite okay, maybe better than expected. But then if you go to the drivers, they all find it way too artificial and fake, because Lando Norris said, yeah, it's basically flying past someone on the straights based on how you deploy the energy. The funniest anecdote came from Oliver Behrman. Oliver Behrman said, yeah, at the beginning of the race, I was like, let's try this button. It was the boost button. And he said, I pressed it, and all of a sudden I overtook 5 cars. So he said it almost felt like me being in Formula 1 and all the others being in Formula 2. Then the downside of it, your battery will go flat. So in the upcoming straights, you're a sitting duck, and they will basically get you back. And that's why Oliver Behrman said, to me, this is not racing, but this is Formula E or a video game. So still, even though I think that's also Formula 1's opinion, that as a show, as a spectacle for the fans, it was not too bad. But then if you go to the drivers, they are still not happy because it feels way too unnatural to them. As I said, the FIA and Formula One management, they still want to wait for the second weekend, which will be in China next week, also the first sprint weekend of the season. After that, there will be an evaluation and see if we can make any changes. That will be relatively minor changes because we cannot change the fundamentals, not change the DNA of the new regulations. Anyway, today and also this whole weekend in Melbourne, it has been the first real taste of the new Formula One. Max Verstappen still thinks it's Formula E on steroids. He's not the biggest fan of it. But anyway, the new era is underway. The new era will continue next week in Shanghai. Then we'll be back with new episodes of First Laps. So for now, thanks for watching and hope to see you again next week.